Well, welcome to another Auto Buyer's Guide podcast. I'm here with Travis, and we're going to be talking about what makes a good SUV. We're going to be talking about the top 10 best-selling vehicles in North America today and what you might want to buy instead of them. So let's just roll through that intro that not everybody is a fan of. And while you're listening to it, ponder offering us a suggestion. It can't just be it's bad. It's got to be this is what should replace it. Let's roll it.
If you're looking for a new or used car to buy, maybe a truck or SUV or all-electric ride, we're the guys to help you decide. Here on the Auto Buyer's Guide.
So Alex, we're starting today with a big question. What makes a good SUV? And as far as I see it, there's kind of two different directions to go with SUVs, but I'm curious where you were thinking on this.
This is sort of an interesting question because we see so many SUVs these days, and it seems like you and I are constantly traveling to go see an SUV. We drove three of them three of them this last week. And it makes me wonder, since the market is shifting towards SUVs, what makes a good one? What makes a bad one? What do people need to know if they're shopping for one?
Yeah, so for me, I want to start off, it kind of goes split different directions. Direction one is about practicality. So it's about how much can you fit in this vehicle. That's the utility side of it, based on its total footprint. The other one is how capable is it. So I guess that would kind of be the sport aspect. And that's something more like a body on frame off-road capable SUV, a la 4Runner, Jeep, that sort of thing. So for me, it's kind of, are you trying to move people and luggage, or are you trying to go anywhere you want and anytime you want?
Yeah, and I suppose we should cover the question of what is an SUV anyway, because depending on who you talk to, if we're talking to the federal government, a minivan is a light truck, right? And that classification has been used for all these SUV-shaped things. Then into the world, we got crossovers, and for a while, I tried to differentiate crossover and SUV. People blew their minds, and I was like, that's fine. They're all crossovers. They're all SUVs. Just call it whatever you want. It doesn't matter.
Yeah, for me, it's a distinction without a difference, but it comes down to kind of a personality thing. So I think of a crossover as having clearly been based off of a car, right? And so let's take a Honda Civic. The crossover is the CRV, right? That's just kind of the grown-up version of it. But then the question is something like Passport, is that the bigger Accord? Well, no, because the difference might be a little bit too big for me. And that's where I would say we're leaning towards SUV, and that's sort of a size piece of it. But like I said, there's not a strict definition. It used to be, I think the usual understanding was body on frame was SUV, everything else was crossover. But there's so little these days that really is body on frame that wants to be classified as an SUV because of its ruggedness or its capability, and that's sort of it's a badge of honor. We're an SUV, not a crossover. But yeah, you kind of flip a coin and get to pick what you want to call it.
It's tricky because in the classic description of SUVs, people will frequently pull up that it must be a body-on-frame vehicle. But then when you ask them if a Range Rover is an SUV, they'll say unquestionably. So Grand Cherokee an SUV, unquestionably. Well, they've never been body-on-frame. So that is the weird twist there is this and that's why this definition seems to really rankle some enthusiasts, especially when they're trying to decide what is and what isn't an SUV. Grand Cherokee is often in the SUV category, but it could also be firmly in the crossover category because it is directly related to the Chrysler 300 and Dodge Charger of its era. Rear-wheel drive uses the same engine, same transmission. The all-wheel drive system is not a world apart from the all-wheel drive systems offered in Stellantis' large cars, but it's rear-wheel drive and it's higher off the ground and it's got an actual lock. So people want to put it in that SUV category. It's kind of why, in a way, I don't know if it actually matters, just for anybody that's wondering out there, which leads me to sort of back to the question of what makes a good one a good one? Is it practicality, reliability, safety, seating position?
I think first for me is going to be seating position. So one of the benefits of an SUV is that it sits up high. I want to be able to sit comfortably. And as much as I really do like a stretched out car driving position, I want to be able to sit upright, great support for, back and legs and that sort of thing. Give me good view out of this SUV because we're making a big vehicle. I want to be able to see out of it. After that, I want to make sure that we're getting practicality. I want to make sure there's room for people and there's room for cargo. And we've talked about a couple SUVs that are relatively popular that I can't fit in the second row, and that seems blasphemous to me. So if we're having a big vehicle, I got to be able to fit in that second row, much less the third. So those are kind of the two that popped in my head first of all.
It strikes me that the modern SUV is the mid-size sedan of the 1980s. So we moved from huge sales of Tauruses and K cars and Camrys and Accords and Sentras and every other thing that was a four-door sedan. And now all those manufacturers are just cranking out crossovers and SUVs like there's no tomorrow, different flavors, electric ones, gas ones, hybrid ones, etc. And some manufacturers have completely abandoned the sedan space. Although Ford seems like they might have a four-door Mustang, which would be weird.
Well, it's
But
called the Mach-E.
well, they call that the SUV. They call it the Mustang
Yeah,
SUV.
yeah.
Supposedly there may be a Mustang sedan, but that's a story for another time.
Hmm.
I'm kind of wondering how important really is off-road capability for an SUV? When you go to an off-road park, you don't see as many SUVs anymore. It seems like the side by side especially has just blown up. And then we see some traditional SUVs like Wranglers, but then we also see a whole huge number of trucks out there. So it seems like the
Hmm.
off-roading space is now being dominated by off-highway vehicles and off-road pickup trucks.
If I was going to go to an off-road park regularly, I would be taking a side by side, and I would probably tow it there with my truck, the one I currently have. So I don't think it really is a matter of need, but it's sort of a persona thing. And I had this conversation the other day with someone talking about the Forerunner, and we were looking at this Forerunner, going, "Here's a lot of things a Forerunner could do, and here's most of those things that somebody who buys a Forerunner will never do." But to me, visually, something like the Honda Passport has gotten so much closer to that, that squareness, that ruggedness look of a Forerunner. But people won't look at it because it's not a Forerunner. So there's still
Mhm,
just this
mhm,
this this name, this
mhm.
aura that comes with the car that could do anything you want it to, even if you're not going to. Actually, the best example is a Jeep, and how many Jeeps will never see any sort of off payment
Yeah,
whatsoever. But for folks, but if they said, "Oh, this is the least off-road capable Jeep," it would lose sales even from people who have never taken it off-road.
true, true. And this is where also I tend to pick apart questions because oftentimes people will say, well, it needs all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive or the option of one of these systems or the other. And I'll say, well, okay, so if you buy a rear-wheel drive Grand Cherokee, is it no longer an SUV? If you buy a rear-wheel drive Tahoe, is it no longer an SUV? And if not, what is
Mhm.
it? That's a tricky one. On the Passport, this is also a tricky one because it definitely looks the part, a big rugged SUV now, but at its core, it is still more closely related to a Honda Odyssey or a Honda Accord than most of the actual rugged SUVs out there are to any other vehicle in their lineup. So Bronco or 4Runner definitely are not related to the softer rotors in their lineup, even though they look the rugged part. But the Passport, Honda is really dedicated to commonality with parts. So same engine, same transmission, same all-wheel drive system that we find across the lineup. Very closely related also to the Acura MDX and the Honda Pilot, of course.
Yeah, and then there's another wrinkle, and that is a station wagon. Number one, does it still exist? And number two, is it an SUV? I've got a Subaru Outback coming to my house in a couple weeks, and that used to be a full blown
Hmm.
station wagon. Obviously, they've
Hmm.
gotten bigger a little bit, but is that an SUV? Because right now that's what it's classified as, but it's still very wagon proportions. And what does that do to the mix?
Yeah, that the Outback is the eternal question because it was arguably one of the vehicles that helped start the modern soft roader crossover, whatever we want to call this category. Between it and the original Volvo Cross Countries, they kind of defined what an off-road wagon was, and other companies have imitated. Some companies have come and gone. Volvo is really seemingly giving up on the wagon entirely, mind you, interestingly enough. But certainly Outback is the off-road wagon that won because it sells in
Mhm.
huge numbers. It's often Subaru's bestseller in North America or second bestseller, depending on the month we're talking about. And it really splits people because some enthusiasts swear it is not a wagon, and some say it is a wagon. The funniest part of that is when you talk to the Subaru engineers, they're like, of course it's a wagon. It shares its entire frontal structure and design with the Subaru Legacy. Even though the Legacy's not in production anymore, it's still a legacy wagon. That's why the original Outback was even the Legacy Outback, which is the kind of funny part. But there's all
Mhm.
this lore in the Subaru owners groups, etc. Some will say, "Oh, the Outback has a sturdier this and a sturdier that," and literally, we could talk with the engineers as you and I have at Subaru events, and they're like, no, it's exactly the same up front. Front doors forward, that part of the structure, 100% shared with the Subaru Legacy. All they're doing is adding a little bit of extra body cladding, a whole lot of extra ground clearance, some ruggedy bits on the roof for roof racking, and then they squared off the back to the point where there actually has been a non-Outback wagon format in Japan.
Yeah, and at this point, since the legacy is gone, it's more like a legacy Outback. But I'll digress on that one. Anyway, the whole point here is SUVs are the number one seller in the United States, and whether you call it a crossover or an SUV, this is, like you said, the new sedan. So what makes a good one? There's so many different directions people have taken these SUVs and what they want out of them, and to my mind, it's what they think they want out of them. But there's very little that an SUV can't do these days, and for better or worse, right? I think we probably have some over capable vehicles that you spend a little bit more money on that you'll never really get it back. But still, we'll go, one direction to the next. If you want something that's really, really practical, you can look at a hybrid Grand Highlander and say, hey, I can get a bunch of people and a bunch of stuff, and I can get pretty good fuel economy. I mean, all things considered, here we go. This is great. On the other
Mhm.
side of it, you can still get a Hellcat engine Durango, and those are both SUVs. So, here's the world we live in.
I would say for me, what makes a good SUV is at least 7 inches of ground clearance. It should be able to carry as many roller bags in the back as it has seats for in the front. So this really
Mhm.
excludes some of those swoopier, sexier, smaller things that seem useless to me. Why have a little bit of extra height if it's not going to be enough to clear parking lot, parking headstones, whatever you want to call those tire blockers, the tire stoppers? If you're ripping your bumper off in the average suburban mall parking lot, it's not an SUV and it should not be labeled that way. It should actually be able to just not rip its bumper off. I don't want it to necessarily go off road. I just want it to mall crawl without getting damaged. That's my thought. It should be able to do
Seems
the
like a good
school run.
standard.
Yeah, it should be able to do the family things since it has taken over the family vehicle. You should be able to put rear facing child seats in it without actually squeezing like an accordion up to the dashboard, which you have to do in so many vehicles these days. And other than that, it should be affordable.
So one thing this is not is affordable, but we just looked this week at the Escalade IQ, and we saw the Escalade IQL that had been announced previously, but we got to take a quick look at it. And that is the same frame, the same structure, really the same frame, the same battery, the same drive, most of the same things, but one is more squared off than the other. And for the life of me, I can't figure out why you wouldn't buy the IQL, because it's it's a hair more expensive, admittedly, but no one at that price range is really trying to save a buck in my mind. But that's the squared off back end that if I have a bunch of people in the car, I want to be able to fit their stuff.
I'm guessing the problem is if you are in a new building and you have an average new car garage, you might not be able to park the IQL in there since it
I
is
don't.
the biggest
I,
Cadillac SUV they have ever built.
but you're not. It's not like you're gonna make it squeaky clean and easy with the IQ as it is.
So here we have the answer, just Googled it. The average American garage is somewhere between 20 and 22 feet long, and the IQL is still under 20 feet, but it's getting a little on the close side.
It is. It is.
And you want to make sure you're not parking right against your wall. You don't want to blast through your wall, and you'd never be able to get anything in and out of it, of course, if it really maximized that space. But what's
Mhm.
weird about the IQL to me is the size of that front trunk.
Yeah, it's well, excessive maybe, but it's an interesting shape. I think the biggest issue is how long it is, right? We
Yes.
we love extra space. We love using the space that's available. That's what I want in an SUV, right? Using the space available. But It's so deep that you and I, both pretty tall people with pretty long arms, can't really reach the back.
Yeah,
Thank
we measured it.
goodness. Yep. Thank
Bump
goodness there is an accessory available.
There is, but bumper to the back, it is almost 60 inches to get from the bumper to the very back of that front cargo area, which is bonkers. Do tell us about that accessory, and if you haven't watched the podcast on the podcast channel, head over to YouTube so you can see what we're talking about.
Yeah, so this accessory, which I think brilliant for what it is, although it takes up a little bit more space than I might like, is a sliding tray, which is becoming more popular in pickups, right? People trying to use them for everyday
Mhm.
use. So if you want to put stuff in this vehicle and you can't reach the very back, you buy the sliding tray. And we asked about what's the weight capacity on this sliding tray, and the number we got was sufficient to go ahead and test it out ourselves. So that's where Alex, not myself, went ahead and tried it out.
Yeah, yeah, and it was comfy. That's all we'll say. Moving right along, let's talk about our viewer comments and viewer questions.
Yes, so we have a couple comments from the YouTube section of this podcast. You can find us on all your major podcast sites, and over here on YouTube, you can watch us as well. There are a couple comments about our jingle, and this first one says, this is from Asensio. It says, the unfortunately remark on the intro from Travis is hilarious. So there was a bit of a debate about our intro and whether or not I found it particularly catchy, and the answer is not necessarily. But we have a word of advice here, and this is from Chipper6729. It says, podcast intros need to be 5 seconds or less, musical or montage, your choice, but yours is 3 times too long. Now, good news, I think they still watch through most of that podcast, and I don't know if it's 3 times too long. It's just, you can't please everyone.
I did some research there. My research indicates that there are podcasts, successful ones, large ones, have intros around 10 to 15 seconds. So I think we're right on the money on the length. The
Yeah, I mean, a successful podcast is exactly what we're going for.
content, again, suggestions. You can send them to hey@autobuyersguide.com. Send us those voice memos because we're a little short on the voice memos. And you can always dial us up at 669-842-1947. I'm very sad because I put a lot of effort into that phone greeting, and so
He
few
did.
have used it.
He
I'm
did.
so
So
sad.
give us a call. I will
Yeah.
say good news. Trenton737 on YouTube is enjoying the podcast, and Ryochi4 had a little fun tip for us. They said, I clean rental cars. Once you get a goldfish into the seat rails or the cracks between your floor panels, consider that there forever. So
Yes. And he's not he's not talking about the ones that swim around.
Yeah. That one is a very different subject matter that I think would be a whole separate episode. But I believe there was a discussion and a statement made about your vehicles and children never being able to eat in those cars, no matter what. Was I correct on that one?
Yep. No eating in the car, especially no goldfish. I can't even trust my better half to eat in the car. There is can't control adults, but you can try and say no to children. And there is, let's just say, some sort of breakfast pastry on the seat of the Camry this week. Not acceptable.
Listen, you and I are going to be in different camps here. Life happens. I eat in the car all the time.
But you don't eat as if the car is your plate. I've seen you eat in a car, and it ends up in your mouth. That's
Or worst case scenario, my lap, not the car.
Some people can be trusted. Some people cannot. That's the key. You got to earn the trust.
No, and that's fair. That's fair. We did have one really good question that was sent over to us. This is from Assad, and it's a question about tires. It reads, hi, Alex. I'm hoping you can help me with this. I live in Miami and usually run summer tires on my cars. That makes perfect sense for living in Miami. Is a summer dedicated EV tire, specifically talking about a Michelin Pilot Sport EV, going to hurt mileage compared to OEM all-season Pirelli Scorpion EV tires? For reference, they have a Volvo C40 Recharge, which turns out we know a thing or two about.
We have one of those too. And I would say that the efficiency is bad enough in the C40 Recharge that you're probably not going to notice a huge difference. We did swap in summer tires on our Mach E tester once upon a time. We went wider and we went summer tires. So it went from 225s to 245s, put those really cool Lincoln turbine wheels on there. Thought that was all kinds
Yeah,
of fantastic.
very cool.
Some people thought they were very ugly, but these are the same people that love the Tesla turbines. So, hey, I'm going to call it just Tesla fandom, not wanting to accept something else can be epic.
Okay,
But
interesting.
it did not affect range as much as we had thought. It was about a 5% loss in highway range in the Mustang Mach-E all-wheel drive extended range model. But the range was already pretty decent on that model, so I thought it was worth it. On the C40, that's a bit tricky. As long as it's the same size, you probably will notice a relatively small reduction, especially since you're referencing a Michelin EV summer tire, which is already going to be eco-focused, probably relatively small range reduction. But if you really are pushing the range of your C40, you might want to think twice.
Yeah, when it comes to tires, there is a new EV category, and they're doing a couple different things with that. One of them is going to be for sound deadening. So because EVs are quiet on their own, anything else that you hear is going to be amplified. So there's going to be a little bit more sound deadening built into that tire. The other thing is that the compound is going to be designed for some of the heavier weights that we get with EVs versus their comparably sized internal combustion equivalents. But kind of those things aside, the question is it leaning towards performance or is it leaning towards eco? And a summer tire doesn't mean a performance tire necessarily. It just means that its tread patterns are going to be a little bit different and not too worried about, well, not even just water, right? Because summer
Yeah.
tires are actually pretty good in dealing with water, but your tread patterns are going to be a little bit different and a little more focused. So I don't know off the top of my head. I didn't have a chance to look whether that Michelin is more of an eco or a performance oriented summer tire. But if it's eco, I think you're probably going to end up pretty much the same. If it's performance oriented, obviously you might lose a little bit.
Yeah, there really aren't very many summer tires that are overtly eco-focused, I would say. So the Michelin Pilot Sport line, for instance, is a performance EV focused tire. That's how they're doing that in the quotes. It's
Right.
not going to have the same level of grip that a full-on Pilot Sport summer tire would, the top end ones, but it's going to be better than their regular all-season lineup, especially in warmer temperatures. So the summer tire thing is focused on wet performance, dry performance, but skewing towards temperatures above 45, 50 degrees Fahrenheit. It will work well down to maybe 40 degrees Fahrenheit, but when you get closer to freezing, you are going to notice a decent amount of grip reduction and braking performance reduction on a dedicated summer tire. There's kind of this California, especially Southern California, feeling that summer tires aren't good in the rain. And that's not true because pretty much everywhere else it rains in the summer, except for California, where we get nothing for 6 to 7 months a year. Or
Unless
if
it's
you're
this
in
week.
if you're in Los Angeles, it could be 300 days, but not for us. We were definitely getting wet.
Chasing rain all week. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I will say, in terms of this new EV tire, my car, based on mileage, it should be getting close to tire wear, but for better or worse, it's not. Most of my stuff is highway. I drive my own car pretty conservatively, usually just not in a huge hurry, and it's mostly freeway driving. But I am interested in switching from an all season over to a summer tire. The only caveat is that when it does hit winter, it does get a little bit colder here, then I'd be comfortable driving that summer tire in most of the time. So the question is, would I go ahead and get a second set of just winter tires? And they'd probably be more winter focused than sort of an all weather. No studs. Studs are not getting anywhere near my vehicles ever unless I live in the Arctic. But besides that, I have a truck that I might just drive when it is that extra cold or just give myself some extra room. So I am going to be on the hunt for new tires here sometime, just probably a little bit later than my curiosity wants. My wallet is happy with it, but my curiosity is not.
Let's move on to Evan's comments here. He had some comments on his favorite driving rules that people are not doing a good job sticking with.
Yeah. So rule number 1: keep right on the highway except when passing. And that's a very good rule. Obviously, the fewer lanes, the more important that is, because if you are camping in the left lane on a 2-lane highway, you are not making any friends anytime soon. And as somebody who sticks to the speed limit most of the time, I know what lane to be in. And as long as I'm in the correct lane, there should be no issues. Number 2 here is enter the intersection when you're planning to turn left at a green light. And that's, I don't know, Alex, is that something that we have to do, or is that just trying to get ahead or make sure you can make your turn
Yeah.
without causing too much delay?
That's good manners, I would say, because there are some states in the US where technically, if I'm recalling correctly, technically it is not lawful to enter the intersection when there is no way to proceed. So if it's a solid, steady stream of traffic coming the other way, and you're not going to complete your turn before the light turns red, you're not supposed to enter the intersection. But in reality, you really do need to, because otherwise nobody's ever going to go anywhere unless you have a protected left. So if it's a yield, then enter, roll in there, wait till everybody else turns red, then clear the way, and at least you've had 2 or 3 cars go through the intersection. Otherwise, no one goes anywhere.
Yeah, no,
That's a
very much
problem
the
around here.
case. So number 3 is check your rearview camera when backing up. It's there for a reason. And this sounds like sort of a personal experience they might have run into more often than not, where it feels like people aren't checking behind them. I believe it was 2015, maybe 2016, that rearview cameras were mandated in the U.S. here. So a lot of cars on the road should have them at this point, and whether they're ultra wide or just barely there, feels like enough people should have them that they use them more often than not. And then for our last 2, turn right on red if you're able. Depends on the state, and make sure that you're checking the signage. Some will clearly state no turn on red, and obviously don't do it then. But same thing we were talking about with those like left turns, is making sure you can actually keep traffic moving. And then
Yep.
the last one, you can generally turn left on red if it's a one-way onto a one-way, and I would say that is one a lot of people end up forgetting.
Yep, and it, of course, depends on the state you're in, because not all states allow rights on red or lefts on red in
Yep.
the one-way situation. And don't do it in Europe, because most places around the world do not allow right turns on red. You are expected to just sit there and wait your turn, and you will get, honked at, you will get pulled over and ticketed. Or if you're riding with a friend or family member from Europe, you will get the shock of your life when they're, berating you for being such a reckless driver. I remember that very
Mm,
distinctly. That occurred to me. A very good friend that was clutching. There was no one there, clutching the doors and
mm.
handle. Oh my God, where are we going? We're turning right on the red because no one's here.
You're
Let's
just turning. Yeah.
let's go. Let's go. So don't do that. Don't do that when you're overseas. Always sit there and try and figure out who's doing what and why. Blend. That's the easy thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Not always correct, but it's going to be easier to just acclimate by observing people around you and doing what they're doing.
Social cues, right? Just see
Yes.
what's happening around you and assume that more people know than you do when you're in a new space.
Problem with that, of course, is you get to California and you get the California stop, and you're not supposed to do that in front of a cop. When someone's observing you, you're supposed to actually stop.
This is
But
true.
'tis a teeny bit more efficient if everybody just sort of creeps on,
It is.
especially in heavy traffic situations.
Mhm,
It works, it's functional.
mhm,
And now we must tackle the main topic, which is dissecting the 10 best selling vehicles in North America and what we would buy instead of them. But before we get to that, we have to address the pickup truck problem because, well,
mhm,
problem, because trucks account for a huge percentage of the best selling vehicles in North America. And combined, the 4 main pickup trucks outsell, I don't know, I think the entire rest of this list combined. F-150, Silverado, Ram, and Sierra sell in bonkers numbers, and honestly, the only one left standing is the Tundra, which sells in significantly smaller volume, and Titan is, effectively dead these days. So
mhm,
let's talk about the big 4, big 3, really, and
mhm.
which one would you buy and why? Or which ones would you buy for which specific reasons?
Yeah, I will say there are going to be some standouts. So, for example, if you want a hybrid truck, then you are looking at Ford. That's the answer. If you are looking for diesel, you do have a pretty decent variety. I mean, there's some that you can mix and match there.
Well, you have
And
you
if
have
you
Chevy or
well, and
GMC.
you well,
Yeah.
yeah, you can mix and match. If you want luxury, then there are going to be kind of 2 at the top. That's going to be your high end Rams and your GMC Sierra. And for me, I think if I'm picking one of these 4, As much as I probably would like for everyday use, this is me not in the market for a pickup truck. If I was in the market for a pickup truck for my everyday use, I'm probably actually leaning towards a hybrid F-150. But
Mm-hmm,
if
mm-hmm.
but if I'm saying what do I want in the driveway for that occasional whatever in the heck I want it to be, I'm probably going with a Sierra, and I would put that diesel in the Sierra. That 3 liter is just a fantastic little engine. I really love the way they look. I think that is an important part of a truck. That's one of the reasons people buy these vehicles, is because it matches their persona or what they want to look like or feel like. And for me, that Sierra really does just works for me. That's kind of the route I go. Is a GMC
Yeah.
Sierra.
There are probably a few things that folks shopping in this segment should know about this grouping. Ford has recently killed off their max payload option, so you can no longer get your F-150 up to over 3,000 pounds of payload, which I think is a pity. The GM 3-liter inline six is the only diesel standing. The Ram 1500 is the only one with the twin turbo inline six. Ford, of course, leans heavily on their twin turbo V6s. And if you want some V8s, we have the Ford 5-liter V8, which is somewhat limited in configurations. And then we have the 5.3 and 6.2 V8s in the General Motors lineup, Sierra and Silverado. Really, the difference there is just styling, which ones you like. The V8s are definitely going to be the option if you plan on towing in heavier weight classes and in hillier environments. The Ford V6 turbos and the Ram inline 6 turbos, or the 4-cylinder turbo in the General Motors twinsies, they just don't do a good job controlling heavier trailers going downhill. And that's something that I think if you live like I do in a hilly area, or you're in Colorado and you frequently are towing over mountain passes, something you should really, really keep in mind. And that's why, for me, I think I would actually go GM as well. I like the F-150, but I prefer the inline 6 turbo diesel for towing. It's just such a fantastic little engine. And the 10-speed automatic is a really great pairing to it. I think the interior is good in the GMC Sierra. I do really like the Ram design as well, though. Interior and exterior, I think, is really well done in the Ram, especially the air suspension. It's the best riding truck. If you're towing in flatland or you're only an occasional tower, I might choose the Ram instead.
Yeah, the Ram engine is fantastic. So your everyday driving around, you are going to have a lot of fun with it. It sounds good. The pickup is definitely there. If you want some nicer trims, that tungsten trim is fantastic at the very top end, and I think it's a good looking truck. So for me, it's kind of two directions. My everyday practical side would probably lean towards the Power Boost,
Mm-hmm.
the EcoBoost or the Power Boost. I'd have to figure out kind of where I want to go with that, but the on the I want everything end, yeah, I'm probably going with the diesel GM, and I'm going to lean towards the Sierra.
Yeah. If you're going to get some Longhorn horns and stick them on your truck and have the
Mhm.
ultimate cowboy Cadillac, I would argue that the Ram 1500's looks work better with a set of horns on the front.
For
But
sure.
there's a valid reason to buy all 4 of these trucks, which is why they all sell in huge numbers. Recently, though, Ram has seen a little bit of a drop in sales thanks to their pricing and, of course, these
Mm.
model year switchovers. So we'll see how 2025 does for them. But let's
Mhm.
move on, because we need to decide what you would get if a RAV4 did not exist. This is the best-selling thing that's not a truck in 2024. If it didn't exist, what would your choice be?
So, in keeping with this list, the idea is something similar because I could
Mm-hmm,
say,
mm-hmm.
oh, here's every other vehicle that I would personally get instead of a RAV4. But trying to keep things close within the family, think I'm leaning towards something like a Subaru Forester.
Interesting. Yeah,
Hmm.
I like the Forester. It's well priced, but we don't have the hybrid quite yet. It's coming real soon,
Right.
which is a significant portion of RAV4 sales. Apparently, it's the hybrid model. RAV4's also got really fantastic fuel economy, which I think, on the hybrid, I should say, which I think is
Mhm.
part of why it's here. For me, I think I might go in the direction of Tucson, which does not make the top 10 list, but I think it's in the top 20 because we get the hybrid, we get the plug-in hybrid. The looks, I think, are a bit more polarizing on the Hyundai, though.
Yeah, and it's the big thing is the crease, right? It's in the side of the body. It's got this unique crease that I really enjoy. And when I say, "Oh my gosh, you should look at this," people go, I don't know.
Hmm.
Kind of looks like it's been in an accident already.
Yeah, and
But
the
yeah,
grills, not everybody's jive.
Yeah, it's a mix of really sharp and really smooth, and I'm not. It hasn't pulled together quite the same for everyone. I will say, from the interior, I definitely rather spend some time in a Tucson than a Rav4.
Hmm. Yes, the interior is fantastic in the Tucson. The drivetrains, I think, are really well done. But the RAV4 is, and I really hope Toyota doesn't wreck it, because we're going to see a new RAV4 here soon. And I think the RAV4, this particular generation, they just knocked it out of the park. It's the mini trucky look on the outside. They got a little Tacoma, a little 4Runner, vibe going on there, jammed it in a
Mhm.
smaller form. And the interior kind of works with that sort of chunky knobs, little rough and tumble. The interior build quality in the RAV4 is not great. Panel gaps, etc., assembly quality in every model that we've ever seen and driven, even the one that we owned back in 2019, there's room for improvement on that. They've modified it over time to keep it current, and of course, there is still the plug-in hybrid model, which is one of the fastest things in this segment. But the
Mhm.
Rav4 is really selling on that reliability, the fuel economy thing, etc. And we find a reasonable amount of that in the Tucson.
Mhm. Now, the next one here is, I think, a little more interesting because it outsells most of its competitors by a very, very
Hmm.
wide margin. Alex, our number three, again, putting all the trucks together, comes out to the Model Y. And if you were not getting the Model Y, what would you get instead?
That is an interesting one, because Model Y is sort of that. This is going to sound so terrible to some people, but it's kind of the automotive driving appliance. And I think that Tesla has done some of the things that Toyota has been known for relatively well. Limited configurations, really streamlining the purchase process, having a product that is plug and play in that way, which is, I think, why we see so many of them in daily commutes in California, for instance. The people that used to buy Camrys or RAV4s or Priuses, et cetera, have all graduated to this Model Y, but they've also pulled in people that are interested in 0 to 60 acceleration and zero emissions, etc. But of course, this is a good one to talk about alternatives, because let's just say Tesla's got some baggage lately
It's
in their
not as
with
hot of an item as it was 6 months ago.
with their core demographic seems to be having some troubles here. Let's
Hmm.
just
Hmm.
let's just say. So,
So this might be for them who are looking
yeah.
for an alternative to the Model Y.
I would say also, though, a tiny bit of shine has worn off the Model Y, because Tesla set the pace for what an EV should be. It should charge quickly, it should be fast, it should handle well, etc. And it took a while, because other car companies were trying to devise their vehicles as ultra efficient transportation or really cost effective EVs, this, that, and the other. And only now have we seen other car companies go, hey, Tesla's model was probably the model we should use. So I would go with Ionic 5, because I think we see that same sort of dedication to practicality, performance, efficiency, that sort of more rounded approach going on there. But Ionic 5 does it with physical buttons, more familiar controls, and a similar variety of alternatives to the Model Y. So long range models, rear wheel drive models, all wheel drive models, performance models with the Ionic 5N, etc. And charging that is actually faster than the Tesla lineup.
Yeah, and I'll do my number one choice and then kind of a one B because my number one is probably an EV6, which is the akin cousin to that
Mhm.
Ionic 5, and it really has a lot of the same strategy. It's going to be a little less practical based on its shaping, but to
Mhm.
me, it's a little more sporty based on its shape as well. And don't get me wrong, I love the pixelated look and the kind of inflated Golf kind of classic hatchback. What's the word I'm looking for? Dimensions, right? And the ratios there on the Ionic 5. But I would probably lean towards the EV6. That's my choice one.
Mm.
But if I was going to do a 1A and something that's a little bit more interesting, a little bit more varied, I would actually look at something like the Mustang Mach E. It's not going to
Mm.
be the same kind of efficiency that you get on a Model Y. It's not going to have the same kind of performance, but it is a different kind of driving experience, and one that in the time that I spent behind the wheel of a Mach-E I've enjoyed fair enough. I will say this is a market that continues to grow, so new competitors are kind of on their way all the time. Um, you could also look at something like a Chevy Equinox, although that's not going to be
Mhm.
quite as interesting to drive, but it will be comfortable.
Yeah, I would say the Mustang Mach-E does a really good job of being an imitation Tesla. It's something that we really noticed when we first bought one. It's a pretty faithful Tesla impersonation from Ford, and I know they probably hate hearing that, but I mean, it's got a front trunk. The front trunk is almost the same size as the others. The interior is almost the same size as a Model Y. It kind of looks like a Model Y if you squint. It's got that fastback inflated sedan thing going on. And from cargo area to performance to batteries to range, they're very, very similar concepts here. If you want to go really quick, you can get the GT or you can get the Rally. If you want the long range rear wheel drive model, there's one of those. Charging is not quite as quick. And in some ways, it's just not quite there. But I will say on the cheap front, the General Motors EVs do a really good job of just being easy to live with.
Mhm.
And not something I'd expected. But our Blazer seems to be a really real favorite here. You recently drove it,
Mhm.
and it's too big for you, you said, but comfy.
Yeah, about an hour and a half behind the wheel, which is a good, good stint, and it's not the first time I've been in it. The thing for me is that they're not necessarily interesting enough. They're not bad in any way. They're just not particularly exciting. They're not very
Mhm.
quirky. There's not a whole lot of personality, but not everyone's looking for too much personality in their commute to and from work, right? They want something that's
Yeah.
comfortable, that has space, that is easy to use and live with, and has the feature set they're looking for. The General Motors options right now do have that. It's just
Mhm.
it's just not as interesting as I would like it. And admittedly, if I was going to get any General Motors product within this lineup, I'd go get the Honda Prologue. So
Mhm.
there you go.
But, the Blazer EV and the Equinox EV are more interesting than their gasoline counterparts, and I think that
Mm-hmm.
when we look at the Chevy lineup, this is what I think the Chevy customer specifically was interested in, because it's not like I would say the Equinox is overly exciting, and it sells really quite well in the US. Blazer,
Right.
less so, but the regular Blazer's not setting anyone's hair on fire, but you know what could? That Blazer SS that you'll be driving soon.
And there is performance in 0 to 60 in the corners. I'd rather go with some of those other options. Give me that
Treat it
EV6
gently.
GT. Give me that EV6 GT every day of the week. Absolutely.
Yeah, Blazer's heavy, but actually shockingly cheap for both Blazer and Equinox. They're really aggressive on that. Let's move
Yeah.
on to the RAV4 alternative we didn't talk about, interestingly, in our RAV4 discussion, which was CRV. What would you get instead of a CRV?
The one of the reasons neither of us answered CRV is because we knew it was on the list, and so you can't say it and then have to come up with an alternative for that one. For
Hmm.
me, I think one of the closest, reproductions of the CRV that is not a CRV, I would go with something like a Mazda CX-5. That is going to feel like a slightly more premium experience for a hair more money, but the style and the performance, and I say CX-5, not CX-50. I'll stick with the CX-5.
CX-5's too old for me.
Hmm.
And I think that I didn't mention CRV because it's actually one of my least favorites, oddly enough, in this segment. I think it comes across as a little bit too boring, and the hybrid is a little disappointing compared to the RAV4 hybrid. It is big inside, and the cargo area is big. The 1.5-liter turbo in CVT has never been exactly my cup of tea. I think that as Honda's vehicles have gotten bigger and heavier, et cetera, and the 1.5-liter turbo, output has changed here and there, and their programming strategy on the CVT has changed over time. It's just not exciting somehow or that
Hmm.
interesting. I might steer towards something like a Sportage or a Tucson in that, or a RAV4. I think if I were shopping between CRV and RAV4, unless you need the extra legroom in the back, I would generally recommend RAV4 and generally do.
Yeah, and this is not the only other vehicle on this list that's going to fall into that kind of size and comparison category. But CRVs sell well for a reason, and admittedly, I tend to lean towards the Honda product versus the Toyota product, just because of how it feels to drive. I just mentioned that the General Motor options don't really excite me, and I tend to find some
Mhm.
of that in the Toyota lineup as well. So that's why I would steer kind of a different direction. And Mazda has just seemed to fit me and my personality and kind of what I'm looking for in a driving experience a little bit better. So that's why I would head that direction.
Next up, we have the Toyota Camry, which I'm actually driving this week.
You are.
And this year is all hybrid. So that's a key point here. All hybrid. Definitely sharper looking, less dowdy looking than before, but intriguingly, it did not actually have much of a structural change. It had a visual makeover and an electronic and hardware makeover, but not a substantial hardware change underneath the skin. Still a really good seller, and I think actually the best-selling the best-selling hybrid, because it doesn't have a plug-in hybrid, but the best-selling hybrid in America is the Camry. If it wasn't around, I would probably go with Accord.
Okay. I mean, is it just because that's kind of your same size category, or are there different pieces of the Accord that you like more than you like over in the Camry?
I think Accord's more attractive still. It's older. Its design's a little older because it launched before this generation Camry, but the tail lights I think are fantastic for me. I know that's a little bit of a polarizing opinion on the tail lights on the Accord, but I think they're really well done. I do admit that you only get the nicer interior features in the very top trims of Accord, but I would go Accord Hybrid over Camry Hybrid if you're willing to give up a little bit of fuel economy. Camry's going to be more efficient, no way around that. But performance in the Accord is really well done. It's comfy. It's very easy to live with as well. If you didn't stop there, there's not a lot of other options, to be honest, in the US.
No, that's kind of the trick here is that, obviously these have been rivals forever, but they're kind of the last ones standing.
Mhm.
Obviously, there are other midsize sedans. It's just that it's gotten way, way, way smaller over the last few years. If I were gonna get an alternative, I will admit I have two slightly unusual answers. The first one, it doesn't fit in the size category, but if I was going for a hybrid vehicle, I'd go for a Prius. It's going to be a
Mm.
scale down, so I don't think that's a full answer. But I really do like the Prius, and it's very similar drive system, and that one comes with a plug-in hybrid, which is the route I would go. But I would actually do what I did when I bought my last car. Now, admittedly, I don't know if I would do this today, and I've gotten some emails from the company this week that say, "Hey, what we'd love you to do is buy a new Tesla Model 3." And the reason I got my Model 3 was because of cost, a big portion of it. And the what I ended up paying with the tax credit for my Model 3 was about what you get for a top end Camry. And
Mhm.
I think my car is a lot more interesting to drive than that Camry. It's also less expensive for me. Those are two big wins as far as I'm concerned. I do really like the way they redesigned the new Model 3. It's everything I like in mind, but better handling, better sound isolation, better looks. I just don't know if I'd go put some money down on a new Tesla right now. And if I
Yeah.
did, there are lots of incentives, which isn't always good to chase the incentives because they're there for a
Mhm.
reason. It's because Tesla needs to sell some cars.
Yeah, for me, the Model 3 is just too small to really be a Camry alternative. If you're looking at a Camry as the backseat experience, it's unquestionably tighter in Model 3. It's kind of the same reason I wouldn't go Prius either.
Yeah.
But then your options are going to be limited. With that out of the way, let's talk about the Nissan Rogue because I was surprised it was on this list. There was a time where Rogue outsold CRV not too long ago, but those days are gone because the incentives are gone. And Nissan is, let's just say struggling a tiny bit. But Rogue's big claim to fame is big discounts on the dealer lot. So you can get in your Rogue with, less than ideal credit. Let's just say that. And you'll get a lot of cash off the hood. So it's going to be significantly cheaper than RAV4 or CRV. So if I were shopping for Rogue and it didn't exist, I probably have to say Outlander can't exist for this one because it's just a Rogue and drag. I would go for something like an Equinox because that's going to have similar cash on the hood.
And I'm going to ignore your rules, and I'm just going to go with an Outlander because that's
Meh.
that's that's the route I would go.
What what
You
what
set the
button do I
rules for
press
your
on my noise
choice.
box?
Oh, that
I
was
don't
your
know.
interference. That was the digital interference button.
There we go. Digital interference button. Digital interference.
No,
Moving right along.
I would go for an Outlander, but besides that, it's just about affordability.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with the Rogue. I'm not sitting here telling you this is a bad car. Bad cars are hard to find these days, but one of the best things about it is its affordability, and it's hard to beat.
Moving right along, our next one is the one that that's tricky because it's one of my favorites in its segment, and that is the Honda Civic. As much as I'm not the biggest fan of the CRV, I'm totally a fan of the CRV sedan, which is the Civic, because its hybrid is all kinds of fantastic. It's wicked fast. It's not the most efficient thing compared to a Prius or the Corolla hybrid, but performance is quicker than a Civic Si 0 to 60. It looks decent. I think the interior is relatively comfortable. There are a few things I would change. I think the front's a little too dustbustery for me, but it drives nicely. It's fun to drive. If it didn't exist, I think I might have to just suck it up and get something like a Hyundai Elantra.
See, I'm kind of going a similar direction. I'm looking at something like a K4 as a potential alternative here.
K4 is so slow and boring.
But it's interesting looking, and we're
True.
really getting to a point where there's just not a lot of options. Again, go ahead and give us the list of all the compact sedans that we haven't considered. Because if this was the market I was going for, I would get a Civic hybrid hatch. That's the answer every day of the week. But if I didn't get a Civic, I go get an Integra. But Integra doesn't count because we're talking about cost here. So. I mean, cost has to be a consideration.
And if Civic went away, Integra would have to go away with it. But I mean, Corolla's getting just so old, old, and the fuel economy is good and it's very reliable. So that's a plus. And you can get all-wheel drive in it, which is nice. So definitely something to keep an eye on. Elantra gets much better fuel economy, but it's not speedy. You can, of course, get the hybrid in it. K4, I honestly disappointed in, because the last Forte had a Forte GT where we got the turbo engine in it, or GT line with the turbo, and it produced more power. This generation K4, it's even with the turbo, it's just not exciting compared to the looks. It wants to look exciting, but there's not going to be, a 2-liter turbo with 250 horsepower under the hood to match the sporty vibes.
I'll actually have if I am not mistaken, I have a K4 showing up at my place in a couple days. So that'd be my first time to drive it. I've sat in one before. But two interesting alternatives then, I guess, looking at something like a base Prius, because the Prius has gotten a little bit smaller in its current generation than the last one. Everything's a little bit tighter, so that's closer to a Civic. Or you could go
more expensive.
It is. So that's why I'm sticking to base, trying to keep it close. Or I would go something like a Chevy Trax. That would be, not quite the same category, but the Trax is hardly a taller, inflated crossover. It's more like a ever so slightly lifted sedan in and of itself, sort of a hatchback, sportback. So maybe something like a Trax.
Trax is not the worst choice. I fully support the Traxing. Well, let us know what you would support down there in the comment section below. If you haven't 5-star reviewed us, then now's a chance, because there are only 39 5-star reviews on the Apple Podcasts, and we could use a few more. If you want to find us on the YouTubes, you can see our pretty faces, and you can help us get monetized, because we need some more subscribers and some more watch time to actually...
Please, thank you.
Yeah, actually support anything that goes on here, because these lights are not running for free. So it's sad reality of the world.
I can't finish the backdrop of mine until we get more subscribers. That's kind of how that works, right?
Poor Travis is in an echoey prison because of the lack of subscribers. At any rate, hope everybody's doing well. See all of you next week.
Adios.
If you're looking for a new or used car to buy, maybe a truck or